Okay.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us this lovely June 24th, 2026, to hear from Ann Lansing, the Housing Assistance Officer administering the Section 8 and Rental Assistance Program for the City of Pasadena. We're so glad for you all to join us. We're going to start off by having Burr, our Executive Director, do a brief overview first of all of the great work that making housing and community happen has been doing this recently. And then we're going to have our keynote speaker take it away. So Bert, your turn.
All righty. Okay. Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Excellent. So I want to give a report on what's happening at Making Housing and Community Happen, or MHCH. First, I want to talk about local organizing and advocacy. Locally here in Pasadena, we have won a number of campaigns over the years. So some of you will be familiar with this, but for those who are not, I want to give a couple of examples. First one is inclusionary housing. This was the first campaign that I got involved in over 25 years ago. Inclusionary housing is when a developer of market rate housing is required to include a percentage of units at affordable rates. We did two different campaigns, one in 2001 and one in 2019, and we now have an ordinance that requires market rate developers of buildings with 10 or more units to include 20% of the units for moderate, low, and very low income households according to the area median income of Los Angeles County. Or they can pay a fee that goes into a fund to build affordable housing. And with this one ordinance, we have produced more than 1,600 units of affordable housing throughout the city. Another example is Heritage Square South, which is 69 units of permanent supportive housing at Fair Oaks and Orange Grove. This opened in 2024, and it's a result of a campaign that we did in 2018. The land was mostly vacant except for a small Church's Chicken on the site, and some senior unhoused women were sleeping there at night. So our campaign involved an interfaith prayer meeting at the site, some of us sleeping over at that site to bring attention to it. And then we packed out city council meetings and convinced a previously resistant city council to approve it. So those are a couple of victories that we have won over the years. Currently, we have formed a couple of housing justice fellowships. These are small groups that meet in people's homes for fellowship and then working on affordable housing. One of our groups is working to get affordable housing approved on excess school district land, either on a closed school site or on some other excess land that the district owns. In 2023, we were able to win approval of using the old Roosevelt Elementary School site for affordable staff housing. The school district actually tends to be favorable toward using their land for affordable housing as a way to keep staff and students, since so many staff and student families increasingly cannot afford to live here anymore. But they need to see public support, so we're organizing around that. And the other group is working on local funding sources for affordable housing. Other than the fund created by our inclusionary housing ordinance, the city has no dedicated funding for affordable housing. So we are exploring ways to raise revenue from wealthy interests that benefit disproportionately from our city. And we might be able to do this through things such as a transfer tax on high value properties, a vacancy tax on unused properties, or a commercial development linkage fee. Other cities have successfully used these approaches to fund affordable housing, and these approaches require those who benefit most from the community's public investments to give back more. By the way, I meant to get a picture of one of our Housing Justice Fellowships. I meant to get this at our last Housing Justice Forum, and I forgot to, and I forgot to again. This is not a picture of one of our actual Housing Justice Fellowships. It's a picture I got off the internet, but I promise you that our people are just as good looking as the people in this picture. So if you want to get involved in a Housing Justice Fellowship, you can contact me, either email or phone. My email is bert@makinghousinghappen.org. Phone is 626-993-7958, 626-993-7958, call or text. Next, our North Fair Oaks vision plan. So for more than a decade, our North Fair Oaks empowerment team has worked with the North Fair Oaks neighborhood on a vision plan to expand affordable housing, improve street safety for pedestrians and other travelers, support economic revitalization, and honor the area's history as a hub of the African American community. As part of this effort, the team partnered with an artist to create a mural on the north wall of the Rio Meat Market. This mural features prominent historical figures from the neighborhood, along with QR codes that direct viewers to a website where they can learn more about each person in the mural and the neighborhood's history. The North Fair Oaks team has now launched a new public art initiative inspired by the excitement around designating North Fair Oaks Avenue as the Black Legacy District, a name that recognizes the area's historic role as the heart of Pasadena's African American community. Also, we are hoping that a time will emerge to explore small business revitalization and to work with the city to consider how those efforts could take shape along North Fair Oaks Avenue. Additionally, Jill is working with a high school intern on outreach to property owners to discuss the North Fair Oaks vision plan and how they might participate in it and benefit from it. So next, safe parking. Around 1,500 people are living out of their cars in Los Angeles County. But for a long time, there was no safe parking program in the whole San Gabriel Valley. So in April of 2021, we started the first safe parking program in the San Gabriel Valley at Trinity Lutheran Church here in Pasadena. The program has 10 safe places to park, access to a bathroom in the church. The parkers get access to a bathroom in the church. They get case management services from Friends Indeed. So they get linkage to mental health treatment. They get other referrals, and that includes linkage to permanent housing. So far, we have permanently housed 19 people through this program. Also, recently, we were able to advocate successfully for approval of another safe parking program, an even larger one at All Saints Church. That one has yet to start due to some funding issues, but we are hopeful that the funding issues will be resolved and that it will start soon. If you know someone who could benefit from the program, contact Friends Indeed at 626-797-2402. That's 626-797-2402 if you know someone who could benefit from that program. Next are one-day housing justice institutes. These one-day institutes actually take months of work. What happens is that Jill gets invited into a community, usually in California, but she has done 7 of these in Colorado and 1 in North Carolina. She gets invited by a local group into the community and spends months with them studying their community, the history of it, how they got to where they are, how the local government works, and what is likely to work in their community to increase housing justice. Then the big day comes and they bring together a much larger group from the community to present what they have learned and discuss all of that with the larger group. The hope is that out of this will emerge a local group like the one that became MHCH here in Pasadena. It's a way of replicating our work across the country. One of the best outcomes of these one-day institutes is right next door in Arcadia, and Mike Veerman is our meeting. He's part of that. But this is how Creative Housing Options in Arcadia was born, which has recently started winning housing justice victories in Arcadia, such as an inclusionary housing ordinance. So this year, Jill has been invited by a group in Stanislaus County to do an institute there. And finally, I want to mention our Congregational Land Partners. Actually, they're not ours anymore. Congregational Land Partners began as one of our committees, but we spun them off into their own nonprofit last year. So they consult with congregations who want to build affordable housing on their land. And they've been approached by more than 100 congregations across Southern California. They don't advertise, it's just word of mouth. And so our team has been approached by over 100 congregations. They've been working with 37 congregations, and through these 37 congregations, they're planning 1,700 units of affordable housing across Southern California. And the first one has broken ground. That's Inglewood First United Methodist Church. They recently broke ground, so it's moving forward. In order for congregational land partners to work with a congregation, representatives from the congregation need to participate in a series of classes. The next series begins September 12th. So if your congregation wants to participate in that cohort, contact Phil Burns. You can contact him by phone or email. Phone is 626-795-9771. Email is phil@conglandpartners.org. That's phil@conglandpartners.org. And that concludes what's happening at MHCH. So give it back to you, Ann. I mean, not Ann, sorry, Teresa.
Uh, Thanks for, and I forgot to mention something very important to all of you. Ask questions in the chat, please, and then we'll do a facilitated Q&A at the end of the program. So Bert just went over a lot of information, including great contact information. If you have any questions about anything that Bert just shared, please put it in the chat. We'll document it. We'll get back to you. Maybe we'll even respond to you directly in the chat. Thanks again, Bert. And then moving on to our keynote speaker. So like I mentioned earlier, Ann Lansing is the Housing Assistance Officer administering the Section 8 Rental Assistance Program for Pasadena. Ann is a Pasadena native. She's a graduate of Muir High School. She has a BA in anthropology from UC San Diego and a master's in public administration from Cal State Northridge. And she has devoted her entire career to furthering housing opportunities for people who are low income. Ann began working in the City of Pasadena's Housing Department, managing homeless grants in 2002. She currently serves as the Housing Assistance Officer administering the Section 8 Rental Assistance Program, providing rental subsidies to property owners on behalf of low-income households throughout Pasadena. This program makes housing affordable for over 1,400 low-income households. And now the show is yours. Thanks for being here.
You need to unmute.
Thank you. Okay, starting over. Very happy to be here, and thanks for the great introduction, and Bert for the inspiring presentation about what you all are doing at your organization, some of which I knew about and some of which is new to me and great to hear. I'm excited to give this presentation today, and I do want to be clear that this is an overview of the Section 8 program as a whole, rather than a deep dive into the program the City of Pasadena administers. But as Teresa said, I'm happy to answer questions later, and if it's something I don't know off the top of my head, I'm happy to get back to you later on those questions. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And you should be seeing my presentation, and excuse any glitches along the way. I am a Microsoft Teams person here at the City of Pasadena rather than a Zoom person, so this is relatively new to me. So as I said, overview of the Section 8 program as a whole, and so I'm hoping to be answering the questions for people, what is Section 8? And I'm going to be going into briefly the historical background, the local administration of the program, the types of Section 8 there are, how it works, what rental assistance in relation to California law, or California law related to rental assistance, rather, other rental assistance programs, and then ongoing and emerging concerns in rental assistance programs. Okay, so I'll briefly give you a historical background. Section 8 was established back in 1974 by the Nixon administration. Sort of an interesting aside is one of the many reasons that a rental assistance program that provides subsidy to landlords was implemented back then was from significant lobbying by the landlord associations. So, make of that what you will, but it to me is sort of an interesting little factoid. Section 8 is named after Section 8 of the United States Housing Act of 1937 and was developed also in response to criticisms of existing federal housing programs related to basically corruption types of issues. And it followed limited experiments and subsequent studies of housing subsidy programs that found that First of all, subsidies should be tied to housing standards, in other words, inspections of units to make sure that those units were being kept up in a safety and sanitary manner. They also found that subsidies do not affect the overall price of housing in a market, and that subsidies can be effectively administered at a local level. Section 8 is the largest affordable housing program after the low-income housing tax program. And almost everybody knows it as Section 8, but the newish, and I say newish meaning since the 90s, the official name of the program is the Housing Choice Voucher Program. So I had mentioned that in these studies, the federal government had found that these programs could be administered by local entities successfully. And what they are administered by are what are called public housing agencies. Public housing agencies may be standalone agencies, which are actually public housing authorities. And some examples of those are the Los Angeles Community Development Authority and the Housing Authority of the City of LA, or they may be operated by a unit of local government like a city. So I've got a list here of some of those local public housing agencies. This is not inclusive of every single agency, but it includes the major ones. I will include City of Pasadena among the major agencies, but also, of course, HACLA, LACTA, City of Glendale, Burbank, and Pomona pretty locally, Long Beach at the southern end of the county, and then there are other smaller agencies. Some I've given examples of are Norwalk, Inglewood, Santa Monica, and Carson, but there are others as well. So Section 8 in general falls into two types. The first, and the one that most people are familiar with, is tenant-based Section 8. And broadly, the way that works is a low-income household is going to apply to a waiting list. When that waiting list is open, they're going to wait many years probably on that waiting list. And after the PHA has reached their name on that list, that they are going to be interviewed to determine if they're eligible. And the things that are taken into account to determine eligibility are income. Is the household a very low income household? Do they meet the immigration criteria, which right now, and I'll be getting into this a little bit more later, but right now that immigration criteria is that there is at least one member of the household who is a documented immigrant or citizen. And then do they pass a criminal background check? And the criminal background check is not horribly stringent. There are two absolute no's. One of those is that you are a lifetime registered sex offender, and the other is that you have been convicted of production of methamphetamine in a federally funded housing program. Those are the only two absolute no's. Other than that, some housing authorities are more strict than others, but things that are looked at are violent or drug-related criminal activity. But generally, if you can show that you have attended a drug treatment program, for example, or an anger management program, the drug-related or violent criminal activity is something that you can still become a participant in the rental assistance program. So you've gone through all of that, you've waited your years, you've been found eligible, and you get a voucher. The voucher holder then searches for rental housing and then begins to receive rental assistance. Once they have found that housing, the unit is inspected and the public housing agency has approved it. Once those things happen, the voucher holder is going to sign a lease with the landlord. The landlord is going to sign a contract with the public housing agency, and the public housing agency is going to begin paying their subsidy to that landlord on behalf of the tenant. The tenant, at the same time, is going to pay 30% approximately of their adjusted income toward the rent, and they will also pay that directly to the landlord. Because this is tenant-based assistance, the assistance goes with the tenant. So if that tenant who is a program participant decides that they want to move and they're in good standing with the rental assistance program, which means they've been a good tenant and maintained the terms of their lease, they've paid their rent, they've turned in the paperwork annually to us that we need to verify their ongoing eligibility, then they're eligible for a voucher to move. As long as they are allowed within the terms of their lease to break that lease and to move, there's no limit on the number of times that they can move. The second iteration of Section 8 is project-based. So in project-based Section 8, the assistance is tied to a building rather than to the tenant voucher holder. So what that means is that the Public Housing Agency is going to have a contract with the property owner for the entire building rather than a singular contract for a singular tenant in a unit. So the assistance is going to remain with the building even if the tenant moves. Why would we do project-based vouchers as opposed to all tenant-based? One of the reasons is that it often provides special needs housing. For example, most of our permanent supportive housing in Pasadena, for example, Heritage Square South, which Bert spoke about, the Hope Center, Marv's Place, which is housing for families, all of those are permanent supportive housing, which is housing for people who were experiencing homelessness before they moved into the housing, and it provides services for those folks while they are living in the housing. And there is no time limit and no precondition before moving into the housing. It's also used for senior housing. Heritage Square North is an example of project-based senior housing, as is Hudson Oaks here in Pasadena. And if it is not special needs housing, in general, it can't be the entire building. So HUD will not allow you to project base a 100% voucher program for units that are not special needs housing. So how do you, if you wait on a waiting list for the tenant-based vouchers, how do you get into the project-based vouchers? So there are generally two ways to get into one of those buildings. One is that you are matched to the building from a local or regional system. And the example of that in Pasadena is in LA County and in Pasadena is the coordinated entry system for people experiencing homelessness. So to move into one of our permanent supportive housing project-based buildings, you need to be matched through the coordinated entry system. Or you can be referred from the Section 8 waiting list. So somebody who has been waiting on the Section 8 waiting list, for example, a senior who has been waiting for a tenant-based voucher, if we have an opening in one of the project-based senior buildings, we will reach out to them and say, we don't have a tenant-based voucher for you right now, but we do have this opportunity for you to move to a project-based voucher. And they are given the option to take or to turn down and remain on the waiting list for that unit. One wrinkle with project-based vouchers is that tenants can request a tenant-based voucher to move after they've been in the unit for a year and they remain in good standing. They don't have to do it at the 1-year mark. It can be at any time after that first year, and they absolutely don't have to take a tenant-based voucher to move, but it is an option for them. However, the Public Housing Agency must have an available voucher to give them. Otherwise, they go on a waiting list for project-based voucher participants who want to move. And right now, for example, for Pasadena, we are underfunded for the number of vouchers that we have. And so if you were a tenant in a project-based unit and you wanted to convert that to a tenant-based voucher and move, you would have to go on a waiting list. Okay, So a little bit more about how it works with applying for Section 8. So I get a lot of phone calls, multiple a day, from people who really need rental assistance right now. And it's always a somewhat heartbreaking call, because what I have to tell these folks is that Pasadena is not currently taking applications for the Section 8 program, and that the last time we took applications was in 2023. And we have not yet reached any of the names of the people who applied in 2023. We haven't called any of those people off of the waiting list yet, because, as I said earlier, we are underfunded for the number of vouchers that we have. So for you who is calling me who needs help right now, I give referrals to Pasadena Housing Search. I talk about any opportunities that I know of for affordable housing that have come up at the time, but I tell people, unfortunately, you can't apply for our program right now. So some public housing agencies are always open for applications. That's rare nowadays, and where it does happen tends to be the less populous, the less expensive areas of the country, where they may always be open for applications. The more likely one, if they're always open, is that they are always open for preferred applicants. And what that generally means is people experiencing homelessness, veterans. LA County LACTA was open for quite a while, just for people experiencing homelessness. I'm not sure that they are right now. But that had been the case. There are other housing authorities that will open the waiting list specifically for veterans experiencing homelessness if they have VASH vouchers available. But for most public housing authorities, they are only open for a short period of time. And when they are open, those open application periods must be publicly announced. And what that means is, at the bare minimum, you have to have a public notice in a newspaper. You have to post that notice on your website, and you should be doing outreach to the community, so that the community, and especially organizations that serve low-income households, are aware of that open enrollment period. One thing that is a common area of confusion is a local requirement versus a local preference. So public housing agencies can't limit assistance only to local residents. So in other words, Pasadena could not say, we are opening for applications right now, and the only people who can apply are people who live, work, or go to school in the city of Pasadena. This Section 8 rental assistance is federal funding, and the federal government says if you're going to open for applications, you have to open for applications to anybody. So what is common here is that the agencies instead apply a local preference. So Pasadena does this, where we say anybody can apply. However, the people that we are going to serve first are, again, the people who live, work, or go to school full-time within the city of Pasadena. There are other preferences as well. Agencies generally give preference to people experiencing homelessness, to people with disabilities. Sometimes agencies will give preference to veterans. So that affects how quickly you get served when an agency does have a voucher to issue. But we cannot limit what geographical area you can apply from. Regarding placement on the waiting list when you do apply, that has to be outlined in the public notice, and some common ways to determine where you get placed on the waiting list are date and time of application. That is discouraged. It's not considered best practice now, because if you just do date and time, it tends to preference people who have the technology available to them, who so may not be experiencing homelessness, who may not have a disability. The quickest getting served first tends not to be best practice. So a common way to place people on the waiting list now, and this is what Pasadena did the last time we took applications, is with a lottery system. And that lottery often takes into account the preferences. So we do a lottery, for example, based on X number of people who meet the local preference, X number of people experiencing homelessness, X number of people who are veterans, X number of people who are disabled, and that is used to conduct a lottery to place people on the list. I mentioned earlier that Pasadena took applications in 2023, and there has been no movement up the waiting list. And that is because, like I said, we don't have enough funding to support all of the vouchers we are allocated. So there are vouchers that go unused because we're using the budget authority to pay for the people who are currently on the Section 8 program. So movement depends on a voucher being available to issue to somebody on the waiting list. So for tenant-based Section 8, I talked about this a little bit earlier, but I'm going to drill down a little bit more. So as you know, and as I mentioned earlier, the Section 8 program pays landlords rental subsidies on behalf of low-income households who have requested a voucher, who have received a voucher from a public housing agency. The funding is nowhere near adequate to meet the need. Most applicants wait many years before they receive a voucher. Once they get a voucher, they are going to search in the community for an available unit where the landlord will rent to them. It used to be back in the day that landlords would frequently say, "We don't take Section 8." I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but that is no longer legal in California. You cannot have a blanket policy not to take a Section 8 voucher if you are a landlord. However, landlords do have control over who they select for their units within the guidelines set by California law and by Fair Housing. The housing department does keep a list of units of landlords who have explicitly reached out to us and said, "We want to rent our unit to a Section 8 participant." Often these are landlords who have rented to us in the past, and when the tenant moved out, we've asked them if we can include them on the marketing list, and they've been agreeable to that. We also refer our voucher holders to Pasadena Housing Search to find available units there. And we do let our voucher holders know that if they have a landlord who tells them, "We don't take Section 8, reach out to us and we will contact that landlord and let them know that what they are doing is not legal under California law." So once they found the landlord's going to fill out paperwork on behalf of the approved applicant, and they're going to submit that to the housing department. And there are 5 steps from when that paperwork gets submitted to when the landlord gets paid. So first we have to inspect the unit. The unit passes inspection. The tenant's going to sign the lease, and we're going to approve the move-in. We're going to prepare a contract with the landlord. And once that contract is prepared, that landlord is going to get paid retroactive to the first day of the lease. So rental assistance in California law. Here are some relatively new laws. They're about 2 or 3 years old now. The first one is SB 267. Which states that a landlord cannot use a credit check as a deciding factor in renting to an applicant if that applicant is using a rental subsidy. If the applicant is using a rental subsidy, they must allow that applicant to provide alternate evidence of ability to pay, and that can include the rental subsidy itself. So in other words, if a voucher holder has credit that is not at the level that the landlord is looking for, they can say, "Yes, I'm low income. I've had challenges in the past paying my bills or paying my rent because of my low income status. However, I now have a Section 8 voucher that guarantees that I will pay approximately 30% of my income towards the rent, and the housing authority will pay the rest, and thus I am not a credit risk for you renting this apartment to me. Landlords, however, can still focus on rental history. They can ask for references, they can ask for landlord verifications, but they cannot have a blanket credit score above X number, or I won't rent to you. Another relatively new law is SB 329, which amends the state's Fair Employment and Housing Act to include rental assistance programs as a protected source of income. So what that means is that if a landlord has a rule that says you need to make 3 times the rent in order to qualify for this unit, the voucher is included in that 3 times the rent. And since the tenant is paying approximately 30% of their adjusted income on the voucher program, what that means is that they should qualify under that requirement. But again, landlords can still conduct applicant screening, but they also need to be aware of other fair housing protections, including race, color, national origin, etc., including, interestingly, genetic information. So I also wanted to talk about other flavors of rental assistance. So I've talked broadly about Section 8. Section 8 is one large program, but within that program, there are some special needs programs. And these are some that the city of Pasadena administers. One of them is the Foster Youth to Independence program. That is a program specifically for former foster youth who have experienced homelessness. In order to be eligible for this program, you have to be referred by the local child welfare agency, and in the case of LA County and Pasadena, that's the Department of Children and Family Services. So we administer this very small program. We right now have 5 vouchers fully in use. And all of our referrals come through the DCFS. We have applied to HUD for an additional 10 vouchers. In the past administration, when we applied, we got word that we were getting our vouchers fairly quickly. We haven't heard anything in quite a few months on this next allocation of vouchers. We're still hopeful, but it's not an administration that tends to be as supportive of rental assistance programs as we have seen in the past. Another program that we administer is the Non-Elderly Disabled program. So that is for people who have disabilities who are 55 years of age or younger. And folks who are assisted from this program are people who were on our waiting list who meet that qualifying requirement. We also have a program called the Mainstream Program, which serves a similar population. And it's a very similar program. When we were first received this funding, we did a program called the MOVE program, which was specifically for people experiencing homelessness who met the age requirement and had a disability. We allocated 75 vouchers for that. That was a demonstration program that was pretty successful. 75 folks leased up and most remain housed, but any new people coming onto that program would be from the Section 8 waiting list as well. And then we operate a VASH program. That is a program for veterans who are experiencing homelessness. We have 2 iterations of that. 15 of those VASH units are project-based in our Hope Center project, and the rest are tenant-based vouchers, and we receive referrals from the Veterans Administration. There are also 2 other programs that are HUD funded. but are not strictly Section 8 programs. One of those is the Housing Opportunities for People with AIDS program, the HOPWA program. That is a tenant-based rental assistance program for people living with HIV or AIDS, and we receive referrals for that program from the local AIDS services agency, which is Foothill AIDS Program, FAP. That's also a relatively small program. We have about 15 vouchers. And then we have the Continuum of Care Rental Assistance Program, which is a program for people experiencing homelessness who have a disability. It acts as tenant-based permanent supportive housing program, a tenant-based permanent supportive housing program. So it's a voucher and supportive services as opposed to a bricks and mortar you have to live in this unit permanent supportive housing program. And this program is in pretty significant risk under the current administration with the changes that they want to make to the Continuum of Care program and their focus on transitional housing instead of permanent supportive housing. And I had these in the wrong order, but I wanted to talk about the Emergency Housing Voucher Program last, because that is a program that is in real jeopardy. That's a program that was funded under the Biden administration, and it provided vouchers to people who were experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness. Most of the people served in Pasadena were people who were experiencing homelessness. We have 85 people who are leased up right now, and that program had been slated to go until 2030. What ended up happening is that HUD let housing authorities across the country know that the funding was not adequate to last until 2030, and they said it would instead go until the end of 2026, which really left housing authorities across the country scrambling to come up with solutions. Pasadena has solutions for about half of the people who are currently leased up, with some local funding that we are allocating towards that and some other HUD funding that can be used for rental assistance. For the other half of the folks, we are still looking for solutions. We've had some tentative good news from Los Angeles County, and that they may be able to assist housing authorities because they received some additional Section 8 funding, but that's a definite more to come situation. I'll be meeting with LA County as well as other housing authorities on Monday, and we'll have more information then about that. This falls under the emerging and ongoing concerns portion of this presentation. But to talk about ongoing concerns, this is the big one. Rental assistance is expensive. It is an expensive housing intervention, and the costs go up annually to serve the same number of people because the cost of rent generally goes up and very seldom goes down. And an example of this is that the annual HUD budget for renewal subsidy funding for fiscal year 2027 was $36 billion. And that is $25 billion more than 11 years prior to serve a similar number of households. So this is a program for which the cost continues to increase. And the support to provide more funding to serve more households generally isn't there in a significant way in Congress, even if you have an administration that is supportive of rental assistance. A couple more of the emerging concerns are the proposed time limits on the Section 8 program. So this is a priority of the current administration. I want to be clear that these time limits are proposed. They are not implemented. There was recently a public comment period, which unfortunately is now closed, or I'm sure all of you would be giving public comment, would be submitting public comment on this. I want to be clear on what the proposal is, though. It is not for every single participant on a rental assistance program to have a time limit attached to their assistance. What is proposed is that the people would be exempted who are seniors and people with disabilities. But adults who are not disabled and who are not seniors, they would have that time limit attached to them. And I didn't see anything about exemptions for households with children. The current proposal is for a 5-year time limit. But this has not been, a final rule has not been proposed yet. Another challenging area is a limitation of assistance for undocumented households. Right now, if you are undocumented, you are not eligible to be subsidized. However, if you are a member of a household that includes somebody who is a citizen or a legal resident, you can live in that household, but the assistance is prorated. What this means in practice is that these households, they're called mixed households for this purpose. These mixed households generally pay a much higher portion of rent as tenant rent than a fully documented household would. So sometimes they are paying 50, 60, 70, even 80% of their income towards the rent. But they're getting that small subsidy for the person in the household who is documented. What the proposal is to prohibit even these mixed households. So in order to be assisted, you would have to kick out those family members who are not fully documented. And there was a public comment period for this. For both of these, there, so that you're aware, there is very robust organizing by the public housing agencies to make sure that we all submit our public comment. There is help in drafting a public comment if you're at a loss for what to say. So there has been a lot of effort on the part of the public housing agencies to try and to make the case that these two proposals are not proposals that we would support, and are not proposals that are beneficial to rental assistance households or to the communities that public housing agencies serve as a whole. And in fact, particularly with the proposal for the limitation of assistance for undocumented households, that these proposals actually destabilize communities. But we are waiting to see where HUD eventually lands on this, and more to come. So that's going to conclude my presentation, and I'm not sure, I talked for a long time. It was a lot of information, so I'm not sure how much time we have for questions now, but I am certainly open to take some if that works for people.
Thanks, Anne. That was fantastic. Before we go into live questions, I'm going to go through some of the questions that we have here in the chat. I see you're getting some thumbs up of appreciation of your
I
great
appreciate
presentation.
it.
Okay, I'm going to go in order of the questions that were asked, and then Stephen asked a couple of questions, and I'm adding on a little bit to them. And Stephen, let me know if I'm taking your questions in the wrong direction. Would you be able to briefly describe the role of federal, state, county, and city involvement in Section 8 vouchers?
Okay, so it's generally not. Well, that's a complex question. So I talked at the very beginning about local administration. And in general, the local administration so the funding comes from the federal government. All Section 8 funding comes from the federal government. And in fact, local jurisdictions are not allowed to supplement this federal funding with local funding to sort of increase the population that we can serve. You are limited to using that federal funding, and that federal funding goes from HUD to the public housing agency. The public housing agency can either be a city agency or some other iteration of a local government, or it can be a public housing authority, which is a joint powers authority created with some authorization from the state. But there's generally not state funding involved in it. So that's sort of a big picture thing, which I think generally answers your question.
Great. And actually, on that, I think your answer triggered a question from Mike. Do you know which organization is the PHA for Arcadia? Is it LACTA?
It is LACTA. That's a nice softball question. Thanks for that, Mike.
All right. Another question from Stephen. Can you talk about the Shelter Plus Care program regarding project-based vouchers? And again, Stephen, let me know.
I think that's how I started. I haven't heard the term used in years, so I'm kind of.
Okay, yeah, so that's a good question. The program that was called Shelter Plus Care went away 10 years ago, 15 years ago, and was replaced with the Continuum of Care rental assistance program. But like Section 8 really being the housing choice voucher program, Shelter Plus Care is a term that is still commonly used when really it refers to the Continuum of Care rental assistance program. So Continuum of Care rental assistance has some differences in how the program is administered that wouldn't matter to the typical person, but matters to the housing authority that's administering the program.
Great. It's incredible how these vocabulary terms change over time. That was a nice history lesson you gave us, Stephen, or you were able to give us. And then
I'm a stickler for terms.
And then Joanne asked, how many people applied in Pasadena in 2023 when the application process was last opened?
Okay, so are you ready to have your heart slightly broken? When we took applications, and it was for, I believe, a 3-week period, 27,000, give or take, households applied. And this goes back to you can't say it's only for residents of Pasadena. So most of the people who applied live in Los Angeles County, but though we did have some from further afield. But we, as I said earlier, we did a lottery to select. We had determined ahead of time 7,500 is a reasonable size for our voucher waiting list to be. So we did a lottery to select 7,500 households from that 27,000 that applied.
It is heartbreaking. Let's see, Mike asked another question just now in the chat. What happens when a person or family, a household, gets a voucher, gets into a rental unit, but then later gets a better job and their income exceeds the income limit? Do they lose their voucher? What happens then?
That's a fabulous question. The income limit generally only applies during the eligibility determination process. Part of the desired purpose of the Section 8 program is that people can and should be able to grow their income. So the program participant who gets a better job, gets more hours, has family members who age into being able to work, their portion of rent will increase, but they will not income disqualify. When they would lose the voucher or lose the assistance is at such point that their portion of rent equaled the full rent on the unit. So in other words, 30% of their income equals the whole rent. And they could actually go like that for It used to be 6 months, but I believe it's actually 3 months now that you can go like that. We will allow you to stay on the program with what's called zero HAP, zero housing assistance payment. And at the end of that period of time, you would be terminated because you're not receiving assistance.
Great. Okay, Sonia asked a long question that I just dropped in the chat for everybody to follow along with me. The Pasadena City Council has advised the housing department to notify them if there are insufficient motel vouchers to be able to appropriate more funding. If the department cannot find funding for all EHV holders, will the housing department advise the Housing, Homelessness, and Planning Committee, as well as the city council, that funding is needed or that these folks will lose their housing because the council needs to appropriate this funding?
That's a great question that I'm going to copy out of chat. And we are going to take under advisement here. Our hope is that we won't get to that situation. And like I said, there's an important meeting on Monday and more to come on that. But if we do, we are going to do whatever we reasonably can to prevent folks from experiencing homelessness again. So we'll get back to you on that one.
Great. All right. We got two more from Carl. What rental assistance is available for immigrants with TPS or other special immigration status, for example, refugees with or people with green cards?
So the easy one is green card. So if you have a green card, you are a legal resident. And we have many people with various types of non-citizenship status who are participating in the rental assistance program. So you would be eligible. Temporary protected status, that's a more complex one that I don't want to give a blanket answer to because it's going to depend on the type of temporary protected status. My knee-jerk answer would be that in general you would be eligible, but depending on the time frame of the temporary protected status, you're probably not going to get the assistance quickly enough. We are at the point right now where in LA County people are waiting many years to decades to get rental assistance.
Thanks, Anne. All right, we're at the last question in the chat so far. Jill asked, with the cost of housing so high, what kind of problems does this pose for voucher holders? Are some landlords losing money? There is a cap of what rent is allowed. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, so that's an interesting question, and it's sort of an interesting thought exercise that in the reality of implementation is actually a real pain point for us. So, speaking frankly, we are in a situation where the current administration is not supportive of rental assistance programs, and they are following an administration that was extremely supportive of rental assistance program. And that is its own very special pain point, because the last administration's Department of Housing and Urban Development really did some innovative things. One of them was the emergency housing voucher program, which is now not being supported by the current administration. The other, and in relation to this question, is what are called small area fair market rents. And fair market rents are what we base our payment standards on. And the payment standards are how we determine what a tenant pays for rent and whether they can afford a unit. So under the Biden administration, we got these small area fair market rents, which were much higher than in most areas of Pasadena than past fair market rents were. And thus, tenants were much more able to afford units in areas where they hadn't been able to lease up in the past. West Pasadena, or I'm sorry, Southwest Pasadena, East Pasadena. It really opened up a lot of higher opportunity areas for them. Now, with an administration that is less supportive of rental assistance, we're finding that our funding is not going as far, and we have to lower those payment standards so that we basically our program doesn't go broke. So that's the complicated situation that we're in, where in general we are able to approve the rents that landlords want. In general, the payment standards make it affordable for the program participant to rent that unit, but we have to lower those payment standards for tenants who are moving so that we can keep the program afloat. Is that like way too inside baseball, or does that make sense?
Sort of. It's pretty complicated. But I think we kind of get it.
Your question about landlords going broke. Generally, we were able to approve the rent that landlords want when they ask for rent increases. That's more of an issue for tenants who've been living in a unit for a really long time under the Section 8 program. We were generally able to increase the rent when they asked for rent increases. Where we get issues with landlords going broke, and whether they're going broke or not, I can't speak to that. Whether there are issues where it causes a financial hardship for a landlord,
right.
This tends to happen more in situations where it's been a building where there are landlords who have owned it for a very long period of time. They may be retiring and passing it on to their children. Their children are seeing additional expenses with insurance going up in California. That's where we get those pain points.
Mm-hmm.
All right, I'm going to ask you a personal question, an easy one. Are you still in your office? It looks like you're still hard at work.
I am, and that was a personal decision because I've got the double screens here. I thought it's going to be way easier for me to do this at work than to try and do it at home with a laptop.
All right.
Thank
Well,
you for sticking around. Yeah.
Yeah, I
My
hope you've
pleasure.
already had some dinner. But yeah, thank you very much. Okay, we've got three more questions queued up. All right, Jill asked, what is meant by genetic info for fair housing? Also, are all the vouchers for disabled being used?
So the first question, I'm going to have to get back to you on that one. It occurred to me when I said it that I wish I hadn't said it, because I could, at one point when I had a fair housing training, I knew what that was. That's a pretty niche California specific fair housing law. It's not a federal fair housing law. And I don't remember what it was, but I can get back to you on that.
Okay, great. And then I'm also taking notes of all of these questions, and we'll follow up with you, Anne.
Great.
So you have to keep notes. And then the second part of that question was, are the vouchers for disabled being used?
So yes, and like our larger universe of housing choice vouchers here in Pasadena, we are not using all of the vouchers, but we are using all of the vouchers that we have funding for. So we are required to either be 90% leased up or spending 90% of our budget authority. We are spending 100% of our budget authority, and we are about 85% leased up with voucher utilization.
There's certain ones that all of them are like Do you have used all the VASH?
We've used all the VASH. Yeah.
You've used all of them. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Do you have a follow-up, Jill?
Yeah, I was not aware that that students had a priority, full-time students. I'm curious how that works because they're usually kind of temporary in the city. So
that's based on a HUD regulation. If a jurisdiction gives a preference for people who live in the jurisdiction, you have to give a preference to people who work in the jurisdiction. And if you give preference to people who work in the jurisdiction, you have to give an associated preference to people who are students. But it gets complicated because of what you're talking about. So for example, somebody who is a full-time student who is a dependent of another adult, like your typical college student, is not eligible for Section 8. So there's all kinds of minutia involved in that one.
Are we using any vouchers for that purpose or no?
So it's not that vouchers are set aside specifically for that purpose. It's that it gives you a preference for any of the vouchers.
Right. Okay.
Great. Thanks. Anthony asked, does rent control apply with Section 8 recipients?
Yes, but the tenant protection portion. So first of all, California has AB 1482, which is a rent stabilization measure, and that applies to Section 8 units, period, full stop, as long as the building is otherwise covered by Section 8. So there's a year built component of that. I'm sorry, otherwise covered by rent control. There's a year built component to that. So the newer buildings might not be covered, but if the building would be covered, then it applies to Section 8 units. Pasadena's specific rent stabilization, Measure H, the tenant protection portions of it apply full stop to Section 8 units. But the rent stabilization portion only applies once the tenant's portion of rent is affected by any rent increase. And it's complicated, and I've had multiple meetings with rent stabilization to make sure that we are administering this correctly. So if you want to know more on that, feel free to send me an email, but it's probably way too inside baseball to explain over a webinar.
Fascinating. Got a complex job. All right. Sonia asked a question, and Sonia, this is a question plus an example for that question, right? I want to make sure I'm seeing this right. So Sonia asked, are you aware of any discussions at the state level to possibly assist with rental subsidies that the feds will no longer provide? For example, Sonia has a friend who is formerly unhoused who is in permanent supportive housing, whose clients, at least most of them, do not have Section 8 vouchers.
I'm not sure I understand the example. If you want to try and clarify, the state, I'm not aware of any discussions at the state level to provide a robust permanent type of rental subsidy like Section 8. They provide funding for some shorter term rental assistance programs for people experiencing homelessness, but nothing like Section 8. And I'm not aware of any discussions. That doesn't mean it's not happening, but it hasn't gotten on my radar.
And then Sonia, do you want to explain the example?
Yeah, and the place where my friend was originally for people who were undocumented or underdocumented, so they did not have Section 8 vouchers, and yet they are all continue to be housed in permanent supportive housing. I don't know what the funding mechanism is for that. But I'm wondering if there's some way that we could increase the possibility of these rental subsidies and not rely solely on the Section 8 vouchers, particularly with the current administration.
Yeah. I mean, if you want to send me the name of the program, I can try and find out what the funding source is. There are some federal funding sources that in the past, the general determination had been there is not a documentation requirement for there's not an immigration documentation requirement for this program. HOPWA is an example of that. Recent guidance has suggested that the current administration does not support that interpretation of the regulations. So it may be something like that. Additionally, for homeless programs, if it is considered a life and safety program, like a food bank type of program or an emergency shelter program, particularly a bad weather shelter, there's no immigration requirement for that because it's considered something that would save somebody's life. So it's possible that the program that your friend is in falls under that category, even though it's sort of considered a quasi-permanent supportive housing program.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
All right, the questions keep on coming, Anne. They're not, the people are not scared of your technical answers. All right, so Carl followed up again about refugee housing. It looks similar to the previous question. So Carl, I'm wondering, is there a specific referral you might be
Yes.
looking for someone? Is that what you're trying to get at?
Correct. So, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So, I'm part of a group that resettled a family in Pasadena from Afghanistan. They have all been resettled. It's a mother, father. They came with 2 kids. They have 2 additional children now. So, and they all have green cards or have birthright citizenship. The breadwinner of the family is very low income. I think it's less than $20,000 a year anyway. The landlord has been wonderful at supporting them with just voluntary low rent, and I'm wondering how to get them some assistance so that the landlord and they can feel more comfortable and more certain of their current situation.
Yeah, so I mean, I can tell you I'm not going to be able to give you a great answer on this webinar. Honestly, with all the shifts in and the policy focus right now, I would even be hesitant to say whether that would be a household that would qualify for most federally funded housing programs or will in the future. Even a family not in this situation, these are like phone calls that I get every single day of people who are looking for rental assistance right now. Mm-hmm. And the real answer is, I don't have an answer for you. And frankly, I don't think that there is anything available in any reasonable time frame that would be able to assist you. The referrals I generally give those people are, like I said, Pasadena Housing Search, affordable housing programs that I know are leasing up at that time. And why don't you shoot me an email, because there's a very specific Housing Authority of the City of LA resource that I could give you. but they would have to move. But Housing Authority of the City of LA owns property that they operate as affordable housing. So there's no subsidy, but the rent is lower than market rate rent. So it may or may not be helpful to the household. If you shoot me an email, I can send you a link to that information, and it's updated weekly.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
And I'm going to share my screen again, I think. Hold on. I'm coming to the limits of my ability to Zoom well. So I'm just going to tell you my email address. It is
Okay.
A like Apple, LANSING at cityofpasadena.net.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, wait, I can do it now. It was a super simple problem. Okay, here's my email address. Here's my phone number.
Great.
Great.
And then we have one last question, and then I'm going to hand it off to Anthony, who has an advocacy opportunity regarding Section 8 that he's going to discuss. So the last question that I'm going to do, and then perhaps Joanne, if we have more time afterwards, I'll get back to you. In the interest of time, I want to hopefully wrap up in the next 10 minutes or so. And so Stephen was asking about the time frame at the federal government, considering Trump's cuts. What are some timelines we might be able to anticipate regarding restoring the cuts that he made?
So if there's a change in the federal government, I mean, you know, we've got what, 2 3/4 more years of the current administration. If there are,
So I was speaking about like Congress and the votes in November.
so that will affect what he can do what can be done by this administration going forward. It's going to depend on how much fight they want to take on. So yeah, I don't. Yours is sort of $1 million question. I mean, wouldn't I like to know as well?
Yeah.
What about the next budget? I mean, isn't it at the end of the year for the next year, something like that? Is that the general how it goes?
Yeah. I mean, for the budgeting process, the budget that the White House comes out with. So some of you may have seen recently the proposed White House budget for housing programs, which proposes a lot of fairly drastic cuts, including to the Section 8 program. That budget is almost never what ends up getting approved by Congress. But you know, it's not as favorable as we would like. So if Congress turns over, there will be more pushback. The budget that gets approved may be more favorable to us. New proposals may be less likely to get approved, but the administration is also doing a lot of things via executive order. So a change in Congress doesn't necessarily help that. So yeah, I don't know. All of this is just sort of spitballing by me. I don't know is the short answer.
Tough question. All right. Thanks, Anne. I will pass it over to Anthony. And then if we still have the energy and the time, perhaps we can continue this conversation. But for now, Anthony, do you want to share your advocacy opportunity with the group? And perhaps, Anne, I think by now everyone has gotten your information, and I'll put it in the chat. So if you can stop sharing screen. Perfect. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to share opportunities to influence our elected officials. There's something called the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, and they have a great website, and I hope you can all see this. And they have opportunities for us to write letters
Two.
to our elected officials. And here's one of them. This is the Bipartisan Family Stability and Opportunity Vouchers Act, S1257 and HR 3776. And this act would provide an additional 250,000 housing vouchers for families with young children to increase housing stability and offer them more choices in where they live. And you can learn more by clicking there. You can then write a letter. Here's a sample. You can all see this, the sample letter to Senator Padilla. And then one thing that I urge you to do when you write a letter, you see this little feature called Edit. This gives you a chance to personalize it. So you write something about, as a resident of Pasadena who's worked with people who are unhoused, or as someone who's knows people who are struggling with their rent, whatever you want to say about your personal concern, you can insert that here. And that really makes a difference with elected officials. We've heard from them that when they just get a form letter, it doesn't have as much impact as when it's a personalized letter. So this is an opportunity for you. There's actually other acts and other bills that are on this website that you can support. But if you're concerned about making sure that our Congress members know that we care about these issues and therefore they should take action, this is the place to go, the National Low Income Housing Coalition. And I'm going to be and I'm going to be sending out an email to everybody who registered, and in that email I'll include a link to this particular website. That's my presentation. It's short and sweet. And I'll stop share.
Thanks, Anthony, for sharing that information and sharing the links so that we can all take action. And luckily, we do have time to get Joanne's question in. Joanne asks you, Anne, are the people on the Section 8 waitlist aware that it's not moving?
Most of them, yes. We don't send out, as you can imagine, it would be administratively daunting to send out an update to 7,500 people on a regular basis. But we do get a lot of contact from the people on the waiting list, and we do let them know what the situation is.
All right, great. Well, it's been a lovely hour and a half hanging out together. Folks are welcome to stay on and continue chatting about Section 8, about Bert's presentation, about what you made for lunch, anything. We like to connect. We like to connect over our personal lives, over the policy. But thank you very much, Anne. I see you're getting some thanks in the chat as well. You did a great job, and thank you to everybody who attended.
And I really appreciate the time and the opportunity to talk to all of you. This is a program that's important to me and very, very important to the 1,400 or so people who are on the program here in Pasadena. So thanks for giving me the time.
Can I ask again real quick?